And I just want to welcome you. My name is Vicky Gutteridge. I work for the Ollie Foundation, and tonight we're just going to have a very warm conversation. We're really grateful that you've chosen your time this evening to spend it with us, which we know is going to be for an important and potentially a challenging conversation as well. So we really appreciate you being here. And for those of you that are maybe new to us and don't know who the Ollie Foundation are, we're a suicide prevention charity. We're based in St Albans here in Hertfordshire, and we were founded by three parents that you can see on our website, Chris, Stuart and Jane. And each of them really tragically lost their own son to suicide. And from the depths of that completely unimaginable grief, they made the decision to set up the Ollie Foundation to ideally ensure that no young person feels that suicide is their only option. And then every single thing that we do flows from that commitment. Everything that we create flows from that vision. So as we entered our 10th year this year, we asked our community, we went back to them and asked, what do they need in order to feel empowered to have protective conversations about suicide and well-being? And we listened really carefully, and in response we've decided to continue to do our suicide prevention awareness and well-being talks for parents, carers and schools and organisations. We're also really excited to be launching Ollie Talks, our new podcast, to kind of engage in more conversational pieces that people can tune into, to host those conversations like this one, creating spaces where perhaps difficult and challenging topics can be explored openly and safely. And like this one, all questions are welcome. So that brings us really to the purpose of this conversation tonight is always to put a spotlight on those communities who might be at increased risk of suicide and to explore the factors that might be impacting their well-being. And so today's topic, pornography, the addiction risk and the impact on young people, is, we know, a complex and for some a very uncomfortable subject. I know I find it uncomfortable too, so I'm really looking forward to unpacking that a little bit this evening. I think we know that it's increasingly harming the emotional and the physical and mental relational health of young people. So I feel that without further ado, I need to welcome our wonderful guests on the panel this evening, because you can do a much better job than I can of introducing yourself and guiding us through this conversation. So firstly, I'm going to hand over to our wonderful Maria, my colleague at Ollie.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us. So I'm Maria, I'm the Children and Young People's Wellbeing and Suicide Prevention Officer for the Ollie Foundation. I come from 24 odd years of working in children's mental health in Hertfordshire, and I'm particularly interested in this topic, having worked on sort of sexually harmful behaviour pathways for Hertfordshire, and also sort of working with children and young people on both sides of the spectrum. So I'll pass you over to the fabulous Nicola to introduce herself.
Hi everybody, I'm Nicola Lee. I work for One YMCA as the Associate Director of Community Services. I'm really excited to be in this space with you all and to be talking about something that, as Maria shared and Vicky shared, is quite a sensitive topic and quite a difficult topic as parents and carers as well. But one thing to be thinking about as we kind of go through this next hour in this conversation is that, children deserve and have the right to a childhood free from harmful sexualized behaviors. So hopefully we can unpack that a little bit more.
Maybe we could go to Chris. That might be a good time to come to you, Chris.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Really good to be here tonight. I'm the program manager for Dignify, which is part of One YMCA. So I work with Nicola, and I think I'm here because I really believe that young people are worth having healthy relationships, and that is just such a fundamental part of growing up and their sense of worth and well-being. And just seen too many stories where pornography has robbed children of that, whether through isolating them, through shame, the kind of shame and addiction that pornography can bring, or or through behaviours that can be normalised through pornography that can be abusive and break down relationships in a really unhealthy way. So I guess I see pornography as a bit of a hidden pandemic and something that we need to talk about. Great to be here.
Thank you, Chris. Shania, can I come to you?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Shania. I'm joining this conversation to give probably like an insight to what it's like as being a young person being introduced to pornography at such a young age, and kind of just to share with you guys what that looked like for me, and also kind of give some insight onto kind of what Dignify, charities like Dignify have done for me, but also just to kind of answer any of your guys' questions. I'm so open. I'm so excited about this conversation. My hope and goal and my passion is to not only share my story, but also to help young people and adults who have been young people, we all have, to kind of like expose the dark spaces, the shameful spaces, the uncomfortable spaces, so that there is safe spaces, there are comfortable spaces to have this conversation. So relationships that were once, uncomfortable or broken can hopefully over time be mended with education and application, and hopefully with just us just spreading the word that yeah, it's uncomfortable, but it doesn't always have to be if we are like of the same mindset, of just kind of getting some restoration in that space. So yeah, really excited to speak with you guys.
Shania, thank you so much for kind of putting us at peace a little. Thank you. And Ross, can I come to you?
Yeah, hi, name's Ross. I'm head teacher at Batchford School in St Albans, which is a school for students with social, emotional, mental health issues. An awful lot of my students, in fact all of my students, are very, very vulnerable. And we're dealing with an increasing amount of issues, not necessarily strictly related to porn addiction, that sort of thing, but just the effects of social media, sexting, and the perhaps lack of understanding of sort of safe relationships and how that works, and the sort of wider safeguarding issues around that. So hopefully, again, as an educator, I'm looking to learn a little bit more myself as well tonight, and perhaps share some of the experience we've seen at school and had at school, and what we can do to support students and parents alike.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you so much. I think we've got, such a broad spectrum in the room, which is amazing. And, everyone is going to be chipping in to the conversation. So don't feel that we have to kind of go in turn this evening. Just feel free to kind of just chip in and say, if you feel like you can kind of add to the conversation. So, but I'm going to go quite quiet actually and direct it over to you all now, because you're the experts really. But I would just like to just first of all ask Chris and Nicola, certainly for me as a parent, I would really appreciate it if you just could kind of set the scene so that we can understand the landscape today, what are children and young people encountering today, how is early exposure happening? Could you just kind of set that scene for us, if that's possible?
Yeah, of course. So if I kick us off, and then Nicola, you can build on anything I share. So I guess it could be worth to give a little bit of context on Dignify. So it came out, actually it was founded by parents similar to Ollie, and it was parents after the Me Too movement, where a number of girls in particular, many of high school age or secondary school age, were coming forward sharing their stories of sexual harassment. And so a few parents were just like, this is not okay, we need to do more about this. And as they looked into it, they saw that pornography was one of the key drivers for that normalization of behavior. So that's where Dignify came from a few years back. So our mission is really to champion healthy relationships free from the harms of pornography and objectification. And we do that through three arms of our strategy. So research, really hearing what young people say. So I'll share about that in just a moment. Education, they're really empowering our young people to make positive choices, working with parents, with teachers. And then advocacy, so using the research we do on a national level to help shape policy and the kind of narrative around healthy relationships. So with our research, our latest published report we had over 7,500 voices of young people who shared their experience of social media and pornography and nude sharing and sexual harassment, as well as their well-being. So we've got a fairly large data set, a kind of understanding and large number of voices speaking into this. And so I think firstly, we found just how widespread pornography exposure was. So around a third of the children that we surveyed had viewed pornography. Actually, in our latest figures, which are coming soon, that's actually sadly risen. And the average age of young people viewing porn was 12 years old, and a third of those who had viewed porn started viewing at primary school age. Some of whom were age 5 or under. So this isn't just a secondary school issue. Really, it's basically anyone who's got access to Wi-Fi. It's one click away, and many of those people have come across it by accident, through social media feeds, through friends sharing it with them, or strangers sharing it with them, even on the bus. So it's not something that necessarily people are going looking for. It's coming at people, our young people, from various different angles. I think the other thing I'd say about pornography is, it is an addictive thing for young people, and for young and adolescent brains. They are more vulnerable to addiction, not having their prefrontal cortex developed enough to be able to kind of think through the consequences of what they're doing. That's part of the joy of being young and curious, and it's very natural to explore sexuality and sex, and that's all really healthy and good. However, pornography is not a great place to learn and to satisfy that curiosity. And so we found almost everyone who viewed porn once went on to view it again, and then of those who viewed it again, over a quarter said that they had a habit or an addiction. It really hits that dopamine. And when people, when there is addictive behavior, that combined with the algorithms generally leads people to more hardcore pornography as well. And the research out there, particularly the Children's Commissioner, has done amazing research around, harrowing research around what actually is on mainstream pornography sites, in terms of the majority of it being violence against particularly women and girls. Some of it is just pure abuse. And so what young people, children are viewing is, they should be protected from all of it, but it's really quite dark and disturbing. So I think in terms of the impacts we've seen, I guess we could share it as their own personal well-being, their relational well-being, and then the kind of societal, cultural impacts of it. So personally, we've seen that those who said they had a porn habit, over half of them reported low well-being, which is much higher than the average survey base that we worked with. So we anecdotally, and Shania will share more of her story. Shania, we're so grateful for you sharing so courageously today. But from conversation we have with young people, we hear different ways in which pornography has really led to a lot of shame or isolation, or even suicidal ideation. And then relationally, it kind of stands to reason that if people are viewing this almost as their sex education, this is how relationships work, then actually that impacts their behavior towards other people. Over a quarter of the young people who view porn said they had acted out what they'd seen, and when most of it is not consensual, is fairly violent, then obviously that's going to impact the relationships they have with each other. And so we do see things like strangulation is something you'll have seen in the news. It's really common online on mainstream porn, and therefore people are learning. We've had boys ask us, how long should I strangle, or how hard should I strangle my girlfriend during sex? It's like, well, of course that's what we do, because that's what we've learned. How do we do that best? And so the normalization of some of this abusive behavior is then impacting relationships and other people as well. And then finally, in terms of the kind of impact on culture, within a school setting, sexual harassment is higher than we would want to see it in terms of the, over a third experiencing weekly sexual humour or jokes, many of whom having sexual messages sent to them, a call to receiving nude images from people. Stuff that's normalised through pornography is then put into the into relational dynamics in a culture, which can be quite potentially misogynistic. And that's exacerbated with AI and the fact that you can then take a person from your class and then make them do what you like, fulfill your fantasies, and then which is just reducing that gap between fantasy and reality even more. So it's not just there's not a separation between what's online and in real life. Young people's minds are being shaped by what they see, and so that's a real concern. I think the final thing I'd say before I pass over to Nicola is, we asked them, would you, do you think that more should be done to protect under 18s from viewing pornography? And half the young people said categorically yes, please do more. And actually that figure's risen as well in our forthcoming report. But I guess to put that out there, it isn't something that adults are trying to, ruin our children's fun. This is something that our young people are saying, please, can you do more to help safeguard us?
There's just so much to unpack there, Chris. So many questions, but thank you. And then Nicola, I know that Chris wanted to hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chris and Vicky. Yeah, and I think it's just kind of bringing it to real life in their communities as well, and just thinking around the amount of harmful online content, but also hearing there's some great stuff online as well that they want to keep accessing. I suppose it's just trying to find how we navigate as parents or responsible adults, making sure that they are screening things that are safe, that are not harmful, but actually if they do come across something, what do they do about it? And I think education is really important. And Chris did touch on in our education model is that we want children to be able to make informed choices, that they have the education to do that. And so what we try and do at Dignify is to take them through different scenarios, very age appropriate and developmentally appropriate, around, okay, so you might see this or you have seen this, and this is what you can do about it. This is how we can support you, because most of it is coming to them accidentally. They didn't choose to see that content or hear that content. So we're trying not to bring shame and guilt on them, because actually they didn't choose in most situations. So we're just trying to bring more education to them. We know it is becoming more in the safeguarding arena, especially for schools, and Ofsted are reporting on this and trying to understand how schools are navigating the problematic and harmful sexualized behavior that children are exposed to. So I think, to have an understanding, we know that this is a threat to children's emotional health, their relational health, their psychological well-being. We do a lot of education workshops in terms of self-worth, because there are quite a number of children who don't see themselves as being worthy, and because of the normalization that's happening in their communities as well, they're encountering explicit content at younger ages. We're now going into primary schools and working with parents and children together in terms of how do we keep ourselves safe online, and what do we do about it if we do discover it. So we really want them to have a good understanding of what healthy relationships are, what consent is, body image, gender norms, and as I said, their self-worth is critical. It's a critical stage of their development and their identity. And so what we're finding is through our report and national research is that there is normalisation of sexual harassment and harmful behaviours, which is deemed violence against women and girls in terms of that strategy, and to boys and men. There's the distorted expectations of relationships and intimacy. How do they find out about intimacy and relationships? Because some don't feel comfortable going to the parents, and some don't feel comfortable going to the school teachers. So where are they going to get that education from? Which is sometimes why they get linked to pornography. There's increased vulnerability, exploitation and coercion as well through online platforms and harmful behaviours. And as I said before, anxiety, confusion around body image and their identity. is it's really sad that, there's other influences and contributions from online practice that's distorting that. And there's this whole desensitization of violence and objectification. So yeah, it's really important that we bring that education to make informed choices, and that they've got a safe network to tap into, to ask the questions of what does that mean? Use the right body part names. So we've all got that consistency and shared language that's going on to help them feel safe and know what to do.
Particularly, you've also got some. I first came across Dignify when I was looking for some resources. I've got two teenagers, and you've got some phenomenal resources. And one of those, actually, there's a wonderful roadmap which we will link to in the pack that we send out afterwards. But for parents, I would really recommend having a look at it, because it actually looks at different ages and actually kind of the sort of the language, if you like, the appropriate language we could use to start some of those conversations. I know, having met with Nicola and Chris, I tried that in the car, and was met with some real grunts and horror noises. But actually, do you know what? Although at that initial kind of shock, once that initial shock wore off, actually the conversations later did, why did you ask me that? What are you?
Yeah.
And it starts, and I think that's the whole purpose of this evening, that we really want people to feel able to start those conversations, even if it doesn't go right the first time. Just maybe keep chipping away and have some of those conversations, because that's how we break down the stigma.
Absolutely, Maria. And just to jump in there, something that I picked up with Dignify when I first started working with the amazing team is that 100 one-minute conversations are far better than one 100-minute conversation with a child. So absolutely, Maria, sow the seed, start the conversations early, follow that roadmap. It's a great resource, and practice. And I think, we don't have a script, do we, as parents and carers, in terms of how you navigate the conversations, but actually what you can do, you can practice those conversations with your friends or your partner or, another adult. So how am I going to tackle this? But actually, children are more in tune with you sometimes than you think. And, we're not here to spark curiosity. We're just here to kind of help navigate those really tricky conversations that are needed right now because of what we're experiencing online.
Amazing. So we'll send out those links, as I say, but I really would recommend having a look at them.
And we can later on kind of unpack that even more as like helpful things like pathways to kind of supporting parents. How do I actually talk about this? How do I do it? I think one thing that might really help, and it certainly helped me when I watched the Sky News interview with you, Shania, was just listening to your first-hand lived experience. And I'm really grateful to you coming this evening, because I think it really just sort of just shines a light on it, and to kind of get that deeper understanding. So would you mind just sharing what your early exposure felt like to you, and just share your experience with us?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I was very young actually when I was introduced to harmful online content, and if you haven't had the chance to watch the Sky interview, I do encourage you to, because you kind of get a little bit more background, and I don't know how much I can share, but I will share as much as I can, and please feel free to ask as many questions. I'm not squeamish. I think I've been exposed to a lot more than many of you probably have, so I'm happy to talk about it. But yeah, when I was exposed to this kind of content, I can't lie to you guys, it was scary. I had never seen human beings like in that way before, and if you've never kind of been in that situation, it's a mixture of uncertainty, it's a mixture of confusion, you're scared, you're not scared, you don't know, you're curious. And I'm kind of built that way, of a curious mindset, like a young child kind of just going, oh, what's that? So that's how I've always been. And my mother would say, you can't leave the house without Shania asking you where you're going to go, like, where are you going? So everyone would come to me to find out who had left the house, because they always knew that I'd boxed by that time. But yeah, back to the pornography conversation. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. However, in the same breath, because I was unsure of what I was watching, and I kind of wanted to understand. It wasn't like oh, I like it, let me find out. It was, I don't understand, let me make sure I understand. And because of, let's say, my upbringing or being unsure, and having parents that, you know, assumed, and educationally would assume they had every guardrail in place. However, those conversations came a lot later, or never really came, because I think they were very sure that their guardrails were in place to kind of avoid those kind of happenings. So that conversation never did happen until I kind of introduced it in my 20s. I kind of had to kind of navigate this space of being unsure by myself, which then kind of did lead my confusion into a space of obsession. And I did say that in the interview, I kind of then went into a space where, okay, the obsession turned into that addiction. And then when you're there and you're 12 and you don't have understandings of what these words mean, then the kind of wanting to turn your brain off because you don't really know what's happening. And then those kind of discussions end up happening with yourself because you don't know who to speak to. So you're in a bit of a dark, horrible well of upset, if I was to say it plainly. But that was kind of my first introduction of being exposed to that kind of material, and navigating out of that space was a lot more difficult than actually the entry. The entry is extremely easy, you know, it's kind of like turning your head, you know. So that's why I believe the conversation, or having introductions of kind of conversation, for us to make sure that, you know, and when we're young, we know when we're going to our parents and asking our parents, what is this? We have the right language to explain that. And I didn't have that. I just was curious, and unfortunately that curiosity led me down a bit of a road. But I'm excited that I get to have that kind of conversation now, to avoid a lot of other children you know, being introduced to that kind of dark space in that way. Hopefully they can come out a lot quicker, or hopefully not have to suffer with that kind of space. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Shania, can I ask you, one of the things that we get asked an awful lot by kind of parents, and thinking of all the parents you've got kind of here captivated, thank you for sharing so much with us. What would have made a difference to you? What would have, you've obviously mentioned about your parents and perhaps not having that right space for the conversation, but what do you think would have helped you at that age? Would there have been a person who would have helped?
Do you know what I think? As much as, you know, I could have an idea of what could have been the cookie cutter for me at the time. I think for me, I think across the board, having parents, because my parents could only give what they've been brought up to give. And I think that's across the board. You know, if you've been brought up in a certain generation, not like, I don't think we actually get trained to kind of teach the next generation. We kind of just give what we have. So if your kind of introduction to that kind of material was like a magazine, we haven't got magazines anymore, guys. You know, we've got buttons and screens and touch screens, you know, so just kind of not like, so there's an element of where I could look back and kind of go, actually my parents weren't necessarily equipped. And I think for this space is to equip themselves with the information, to get that education, to be able to kind of like operate in that kind of conversation. Because I found that, you know, when Dignify came in and kind of taught my parents, and this is beautiful how, you know, Helen, who's now in heaven, she's the one that kind of set up Dignify, when she brought my two parents in. And at that time my parents didn't know. I think I was like 21, and I'm watching them like take in the information. And at that time they were like, well, we would never have this conversation. My parents would never have this conversation with me. This is so, and culturally, and, you know, all of those things mixed in together, it's just not a conversation had. So because it's not a conversation had, how would I expect them to have that conversation? So it allowed me to kind of have a lot of compassion, to kind of go, I wasn't by myself because I had to be. It was just happened to be. And I hope that in this, you know, as we kind of grow in this conversation and are a lot more free in this conversation and come to the conclusion that we have to have this conversation, it's like a necessity, that it will be second nature. You know, it's not if it happens, it's when it happens, and we need to be prepared for the sake of our children. But also, probably there's so many parents on this call that might have also have loved that conversation for whenever, you know, it was your turn, and what of a fruitful conversation it would be. I know for a fact that I loved, you know, I was a chatterbox when I was a young kid, and my mum had this idea, you know, would tell me anything, tell me everything, and that was very true. But you know, I was really good at keeping a secret if someone told me not to say anything as well. And I think getting to opening that door, like you said, Nicola, having those 1 minute conversations, just so you know, like, if this happens, you know, you can come and tell mummy, right? You know, you can come tell daddy. If you don't get that, you know, and those, you know, that will just allow there to be a space. And I think because my parents didn't know that there needed to be a space for that, because there were certain things they put in place that helped them kind of be sure in themselves. I think if we kind of educate ourselves with what's necessary for this day and age, I think there could be a lot more guardrails and protections for children like myself. That made sense at the time.
Thank you, Shania. And I suppose one of the other things that Chris really touched on was the kind of impact that it has to our relationships, particularly going forward, our expectations, I guess, of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. Do you, I don't want to kind of push you too much. I know we'd said before that you'd kind of be happy to answer a couple of bits, but do you feel it really impacted on your relationships moving forward?
Oh, most definitely. I think obviously now that I'm so open, I chat about anything and everything about it, you know, and I thank you for being so kind and like respectful, but honestly, like, go for it, go. Like, my hope is that no question be unanswered, you know. Obviously we're in a space where, you know, it's respectful, but, you know, just to remove the shame about it. And if we have that kind of conversation to remove that, but yeah, it does affect relationships. It affects how you speak, it affects how you talk, it affects how you communicate with the opposite sex and the same sex. I knew for a fact, and I said in the interview, when I was a child, I could be on the playground and I'd know which child had been exposed just on their language alone. But I'm sure their parents would never have known, because obviously they're not having that kind of conversation with their parents. They're having it with their their friends that are also watching this content, you know. And kids, you know, we don't mean, and I'm not a child anymore, but not very far from when I was. But it was very clear that, you know, when you're at school and you spend so much time at school, the same when you're at work, you have to have, you know, put on that work, you know, suit, that kind of work. You're in a professional space, and there is something like that on the playground. And you know, you show up for your friends, you want to be liked, you want to be accepted, you want to be cool, you want to be loved, and all of these things you kind of put on yourself in a sense. And that a lot of kids are kind of grappling with that and learning how to kind of, you know, build relationships in that space. But if it's polluted by this other thing that's teaching you another way of building relationships in that space, that could be very detrimental, that could be very dangerous. And so the whole, you know, I could tell you, you know, and the kids, I could even look back, I could tell you for sure, yes, most definitely, you know. And this was when in my primary school years, and I knew 100% for a fact that their parents had no clue, and it was in the child's mindset to keep it to themselves, because it was very clear that this group of young people understood them, whereas the group of adults just don't get it, you know, and it was under the carpet. But if this conversation is happening out loud, and there's something beautiful about kids that, you know, oh, everyone's talking about it, so will I. They're like little, like, sheep, right? And sometimes we've got to play to that beautiful innocence, but also to protect them in a sense. Listening to this conversation, I'm sure that when Ross comes into that conversation when it comes to the kids on the playground, the conversations, how are you supposed to navigate those spaces, how are you supposed to discipline those spaces, or bring education in those spaces when there's no support or resource, is really scary. So, especially being a girl as well, that was another thing. I really love the fact that I'm a girl in this conversation, because as much as it is, there is a conversation of, guys having this issue and kind of there's that misogynistic kind of element of this conversation, which is so real. There is a lot of females in this conversation that really, really need to be spoken for. We do suffer with this addiction. It is real. It's a human issue. It's not a gender specific problem, and I really, really want to bring that to the forefront, because there's a lot of females not speaking. Yes, they are talking in the space of being extremely negatively impacted by the males perpetrating this abuse, but pornography is doing that for us in our minds and in our relationships, trying to emulate what we see in those things and how we see our bodies and how we see our, beauty. I'd say it has tried to kind of spoil every element. I'm really thankful to have such an amazing community who have sown a different truth in my heart, which is brilliant as I've grown older. So that has really helped me. But a lot of children, again, don't have that, and probably don't have the home, mum and dad set up, or whatever set up, or the carer set up, educating that space to kind of reprogram what they've learned. So they're already starting at a disadvantage. So I hope that the conversation that the YMCA and Dignified can bring to this, and with your guys' questions, could really mend that kind of horrible introduction that pornography has given to many young people's lives.
Thank you, Shania. That's incredible. And I think that is such a good point for us to think about, because it's really easy to think that it's boys and young men that are affected by this. And I think that's what made it so powerful when we kind of were introduced to yourself, because I think you can really bring to life the fact that, as you said, it's not a gender-based issue. And you kind of seamlessly led us into Ross as well, which I thought was brilliant. And no pressure on you now, Ross. We wanted you to join us really because I think what we wanted as well was that kind of sense, exactly as Shania said, of, that kind of vulnerability that you're seeing in the school system, particularly with your cohort of young people. And really, we're just kind of interested in kind of, as Shania said, how on earth do you manage that kind of balance between education, discipline?
Yeah, I mean, it's perhaps slightly different in my school compared to what it would be in a mainstream school, because with us being such a smaller cohort, and again, my sample size is a lot smaller than the research base with Dignified, etc. But it's been fascinating to hear from Nicola and Shania about the experiences in those 1 minute conversations, because that's exactly what we try to do. Because our students have such a short attention span from time to time, and you have to catch them in the right mood at the right time, where they're open to have those conversations. We're finding an awful lot that the impact of social media, the fact that every student has now got a mobile phone, every student then has access to the internet and everything that's great about it and everything that's terrible about it. It was also fascinating with Shania with the girl sort of side of things. We're finding more so recently that the girls seem to start with the sexualized behavior at a younger age. My experience working at Batteries only sort of the last 7 years. Previous to that is working was all boys school. Previous to that, you find the misogynistic sort of traits of the boys become more obvious, usually around they sort of hit year 9. I find it fascinating the difference between those two. Within school, the mobile phones are now handed in. It seems to be now, obviously, with the government guidelines are going to be happening across the board and really sort of clamping down on students' access to that. And when it comes to their online content at school, everything is so tightly monitored. They can't get on a particularly broad range of damaging sites or anything like that, because everything is so tightly monitored within school. Everything gets flagged very, very quickly. So a lot of the issues would be happening on the way to school, on the way home from school, or at home. And it's I suppose, as Shania said, in that playground, that want to fit in, and what they're being exposed to. And if one student has seen it in a friendship group, it's not going to be long before they've shared it with everybody in that friendship group. And it is frightening to hear that sort of 12-year-olds in primary school children are accessing that, as I've got young children myself, that I know that it's not going to be too far away before they have those conversations. So with my eldest, who's now 10, I'm starting to have those conversations about, you are going to see stuff. If you see stuff, you know, you can always come and speak. And I think as a school sort of side of things, I find it easier to talk to my students than I would perhaps my own son, because there's more of an awkwardness with your own children, and that sort of emotional attachment. I think then I know I would have been a lot less likely to speak to perhaps my parents than I would a sort of trusted friend or a trusted adult at school, because it's less awkward, I suppose. My parents would have had that conversation, absolutely, but it's not something that I think you want to have as a child. Therefore, the school's role is very much trying to educate on a sort of a general level, that they understand what a safe relationship looks like, etc., and what to do if they come across harmful sexualized behaviour online and that sort of thing. But also again, coming back to, I suppose, the fitting in side of things, when you're first finding a relationship, perhaps in year 7 or year 8, and you're having the students are having those conversations about that, and then perhaps being pressured to send an image, etc., and we're finding that these things are happening a lot earlier than perhaps they were before. Again, perhaps influenced by what they've seen online, and the fear that students are getting educated by an algorithm rather than what we're trying to put in place for them. And again, everything then for them becomes more normalized. And as we said, you might stumble across something by accident through TikTok or whatever it might be that students are accessing, but it very quickly sort of leads down a rabbit hole. And once everything's out of the box, it's hard to put back in. We've had different situations where students have accidentally sent images to the wrong person, which has created a huge issue. Also, again, for me in my school, where with the students that we've got, we know our students a lot better than you can do at mainstream. We'll hear stuff a lot more regularly than they will do at mainstream. We know our students a lot better, and they don't have a filter in terms of, if someone's around, their language stays the same. So if a conversation's happening privately down the corridor, our students' brains don't kick in time to think, well, this is a conversation that we need to steer away from. They'll have that conversation in front of us. You hang on. You overhear the conversation, it starts perhaps the conversation or a way in to have those conversations. And I think because of that, within our school, I'd like to think at least, and the student voice backs up, that we do a good job of managing that. It's always fascinating when we phone parents to report various different bits and pieces from a sort of safeguarding point of view, that they've got no clue that their student was accessing, or their son or daughter was accessing this sort of stuff. They thought they had situations in place, that they had it covered. They thought they were aware. They often report that they don't want to be snooping on what the children are looking at, but by not sort of keeping a close tab on it, or having filters in place, that the students are accessing things that they definitely shouldn't be. Particularly in my school, the students' sort of emotional age is going to be often a lot younger than their chronological age. Having those conversations with parents about how they then manage those situations at home, when they're allowed access to their mobile devices, which apps they should be on, which apps they shouldn't be on, is an awful lot of work that we do as well. And obviously, becoming more familiar with Dignify is something, resources I'm definitely going to be directing some of my parents to manage that, because I think it's also difficult from my perspective when we speak to parents, is that they're unsure as to when they should let students have access to phones. Well, what's the appropriate age for a mobile phone to come in place, because all their friends have got it. I think an awful lot of parents might be thinking, well, I don't necessarily think my child's emotionally mature enough for this, but there's the fear of them missing out on everything. So then they are given the devices. And then once the students have got that sort of freedom to go explore, and they do explore and come across things that they definitely shouldn't be. And yeah, it's a
difficult
lot
one,
for
isn't
them
it?
to process. It really is.
And I think we've found, certainly through the Ollie Foundation, we've had a few, especially recently, we've had a few kind of parents, when we were talking about kind of suicidal ideation with schools, we've actually had the kind of conversation where it's almost been left to the school to manage the situation, because the parents didn't really have a clue how to start that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it was Shania that said, like, the parents are only a product of their parents and their environment, and it's very easy to blame parents at times, but equally you don't know what you don't know. And if you've not been given any training, you've not had any experience of this, having these, what can be a difficult and awkward and embarrassing conversation, how do you even approach that? So yeah, it can be very, very difficult. And again, from our point of view as a school, again, perhaps it's different than it might be in mainstream schools, we're happy to help parents facilitate those conversations and talk it through with them, how they might do that, and give strategies, etc., etc. So yeah, it's very, very big.
I wonder whether we can just kind of at this point, Ross, bring everybody into the conversation, because I mean I've just been writing down question after question with all of you, and Ross, you kind of sparked something in me that I want to bring Nicola in. So why is there so much shame around this? Why are these conversations so difficult? And as a parent, when we're told about protective factors on apps, and we've got that covered because of safeguards, is that enough? Are those kind of things on laptops and your child's phone enough? Or I'm suspecting we need to go further and have those 1 minute conversations. Can we kind of all come into that conversation of like, why is it such a conversation with so much stigma surrounding it?
And if we come back to the sort of the access to it, I think we're at a disadvantage. I think it was Shania that said, "Oh, it's not magazines anymore; it's all on screens." And the students know the systems and know the workarounds far better than we do quite often. So if you're not very, very hot on technology yourself, it's very, very difficult to know that those apps exist, what to do, how to put them in place. And not quite often the students will find a workaround. I think it was very well publicised on BBC, on the news, etc., when the systems were supposedly put in place to stop access to pornography. The downloads of VPNs skyrocketed straight away. So it just circumvented that situation straight away. And I think, from what I understand, the social media lock that they put in Australia has had very little impact as well, because students have got workarounds. They've shared videos straight away on YouTube as to how you avoid this, how can you get around these age restrictions. This is how you do it. So I think needs to be more work done on the education side of things at an earlier age, so the students aren't trying to go looking for things. I think there's definitely an education side of things, not just putting the blocks in place. Yes, those things are important, but it's almost, I feel like they're always going to find a way around. They're always going to find a crack to slither through to find it, or it will be shared, or however it's going to be. So the education side of things, I think, is so very, very important, that they learn to protect themselves, supported by the adults around them.
I think, on that as well, how we do education, both for children and for parents, is creating those shame-free places where, we don't want to create any shame or guilt around this. We want to have open, supportive conversations where people feel safe to, like, psychologically safe to share. And I think that's really hard, because as a parent, I've got 3 young kids as well. You kind of, the natural reaction, if your kid's doing something that that's scary for you, is to want to discipline, and and that can have its place, obviously, but actually really training ourselves to be that safe space, and affirming regularly, hey, we can talk about anything, and if I'd much rather you shared stuff, it's okay. It's more important to me that you're safe to share what you're looking at, and and then we can talk. But I think for parents as well, I think there are multiple factors that can make it challenging. Not wanting to spark curiosity in your young people. I've got a 3, 6, and 8-year-old, so I'm not talking about porn with them, which is funny because my job is so related to porn. I have to be really careful when I'm working from home. But I do have conversations like, oh, I'm going on a workshop now to talk about online safety. Have you seen anything recently online that's kind of scared you or made you feel a bit funny inside? But just trying to take those opportunities to have those little conversations, and so you can tell me anything. If you do see anything, do let me know. It's really important to talk this stuff through, and just peppering in those 100 1-minute conversations. But yeah, both for parents and for children, I think our desire of the education is to create those shame-free places.
And if you do, I mean, I don't know, Shania and Nicola and Chris and Ross, you might be sort of be able to advise on this one. But if a parent does discover that's what's been happening, what is, I mean, as parents, I mean, I know me, if I'm frightened, I will might sort of panic first and be cross first. My instinct would be kind of, react. What would you think would be the best approach so we don't kind of add to that shame? I think that's the tricky bit, isn't it? If you do discover, if you find an image or however it happens, what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, I think so when I shared with my parents, I was 23. I'm 26, so it was 3 years ago. And my assumption was gonna be all hell was gonna break loose, right? So, it was gonna be that kind of dramatic, and I was just saving myself for it. But it actually wasn't. It was, it wasn't that, and I'm so grateful. Because sometimes kids want to kind of protect their parents, kind of want to go, and it shouldn't be like that, but it is like that. We really do love our parents to kind of don't want mummy to, be scared, or we don't want dad to overreact, or, and I think with this kind of conversation does spark that in us as young people. And I think when this conversation is introduced, however it's introduced, if parents have the mindset that this conversation is going to happen, then you can gear yourself up for it. But I hope that when any child comes to a parent, it's okay, let's sit down and let's discuss this. Let me share what this means. I think there needs to be conversation as well as restriction, because if you just restrict, then we're going to be curious. And then if you just have a conversation, then we have no understanding, because it's like, okay, that's what mum said, but what does it mean? And we're going to try and search for what it means. And I think there's an element of, okay, I've always been that child, and my mum's always said, I just ask why all the time, but why? Because I said so, and that's the worst answer you could give me, because it's like, but he said so too, so what's the difference, you know what I mean? And I think if there is an understanding that mum and dad loves me and this is the reason, and I might not understand yet, and I think when you're growing in that space, there's certain whys you're not going to ask because you don't understand. But as you get older, there's going to be certain whys you're going to ask because you're seeking understanding. And I think if we educate ourselves as parents or older people or carers or nieces or nephews and, whoever that we might have in our care at that time, to kind of prepare ourselves with an educated answer that doesn't have an emotional drawback, we can be rest assured that maybe our children, when going into that space, can actually give an answer to another child that is actually educationally bounded, rather than to them kind of going off into a whirlwind of confusion themselves. We kind of want to educate our kids to be education to other kids, right? When an adult's not there to kind of pass on that information. So yeah, I think being just calm, because that is coming, would definitely help that conversation be very fruitful.
But yeah, sorry, Nicola, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no, it's just really, I think sometimes you just can't be ready for that to happen. And I think because we are seeing it sort of pornography or indecent images or sexualized discussions going on, it is quite a shock for parents and carers. And I experienced, one of my children received something in COVID time from somebody that he didn't really know. And just seeing the explicit content was a shock for me. And I had to give myself some time to actually think about, how am I going to manage this conversation, and how much did they see? So you need to just take some time for yourself, firstly, because it is a shock to the system, because I don't think you ever think your child is going to see that. That you don't think, oh no, they're not going to see porn, you know, they're not in those chats, they're not on those platforms. So being ready for that conversation is what we're trying to do now, is that you don't want to put shame and guilt on children if they've seen it accidentally or any point. And it's a really, really hard conversation to have, because you do not want children to be seeing indecent images. You don't want them to be seeing it in videos or online, but they have seen it. So I think it's sort of, you know, recognizing what they've seen is not something that would be expected for children to see. So make it clear that the expectation is definitely not you know, you shouldn't be having this put on you to see, or it's really, really hard, the conversation, and that actually just they might want to talk, depending on age, they might want to talk about, you know, how did it feel? Is there anything you're more worried about? It really depends on the age, but I think it's that really clear picture of like, this is not expected for your eyes, for your ears at your age as a child. We're going to keep you safe, so you don't see this again. And how we're going to do that is, you know, we're just going to look at the devices that you're using, or let's think about the friendship groups you're in. Let's think about the chat groups that you're in. Like, how can we stop this from happening again? Because you shouldn't be exposed to it. Rather than saying, right, that's it, come away from everything. You don't need a device anymore. You don't have those friendship groups anymore. It's not going to help the situation in some cases, because they're going to be wanting those friendship groups. They're going to be wanting to be in that WhatsApp group. They're going to want to be on those social media platforms. And it's a family preference, what you choose in terms of what you want your children to see. But just have a really good think about of when do they need those platforms? And, you know, if you're going to equip them with a phone, with a smartphone, then just educate them on what they shouldn't be seeing and what to do when they do see it. Let them come to you with a question so you can share those safe answers back to them.
Thank you. That's incredible advice.
It really is. Nicola, can I just ask, like, it might sound like a really ridiculous question, but I'm a mother of 3 teenagers. Every family has their own cultural values. It's different for everybody, isn't it? So how do you have that fine balance between privacy, which some of my children in particular are absolutely, like, would be mortified if I asked them, and I also want them to have that, as Shania said, you know, I want them to have the beauty of engaging relationships, and I understand there's always going to be curiosity. So where's that balance between kind of like dipping their toe into something, not being overprotective, but at the same time, you know, wanting them to not be overexposed, to stay safe, and for them to keep their friends and their, you know, online community safe too? Like, I find that balance tricky. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, it is. It's really hard. Like when, you know, when you're a professional working in this field and knowing, you know, what is going on and trying to keep up with technology so that we can respond better to children and young people and parents around, you know, how to keep each other safe. And I think when also working, you know, we work with child victims and survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence, and you think, gosh, I can't let this happen to anybody. And then you think about, how am I going to make sure that doesn't happen for my child? You know, how do I keep them safe from everything that's going on in the world? You can look at it and be, this is really scary. But actually, some children don't see it like that. They see it as, you know, this is the way we're working at the moment. This is what's, you know, we've got access to. So surely it's okay. And it's like, well, actually, no, it's not okay. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So going back to those 1-minute conversations in drip feeding, one thing I do, I never kind of sit down my children or another young person say, right, we are going to have a chat about pornography, or we are going to have a chat about nudification apps. It's more than likely going to be, should we just go for a dog walk? Should we get in the car? Should we go grab a milkshake or something? As much as, when we want children to have those life skills of look you in the eye and have a conversation, and that looking in the eye is not going to work around these conversations. It really, really isn't. Parallel walking side by side or driving in a car, just kind of dip in a little conversation. It's quite topical. It really is. And, we have those table dinner time discussions as well about, what's going on. And children are hearing about what's going on in the world at the moment in terms of, I think we all know what's in the news at the moment, but you just got to be ahead of it. So if you can be ahead of it and talking about things earlier on, so like Ross said around talking with his 10-year-old, it's just making sure of, if you see something, if you see any nude images, if you see any videos, you shouldn't be seeing it. Come and chat to us, or have you seen anything? It's a real tough one, how you navigate those conversations, because you don't know what's going to come of it. You don't know how much they've seen, or I also find that, there's questions around all sorts of topics that come through now with other harmful practice. And, we're looking at those nudification apps and, the distortion as well. And it's really tough, but it is, try and look at it in a way of, if you were a young person and an adult was trying to talk to you about the harmful sexualized behavior, or some pornography that you've seen, how would you feel in that conversation? So how can you do it differently with the children and young people that are in your world? I think that's what you need to think about.
Thanks, Nicola. And I would really encourage, obviously it'd be in the resource pack, but I've looked at, your parent PDF, and it is brilliant, because actually if you start from 3, you start from that drip, by the time you get those big conversations, it's not a shock, is it? So we're going to refer to that, the parent support document, because it's wonderful. I'm conscious, Jo, that I don't want to dominate with any more questions, because we might have some in the group. I know some have come on. Can I pass to you, Jo?
Yeah, that's fine. So this is a question for the panel. If you could give one piece of advice to a young person, what might that be? And then the same question, but one piece of advice to a parent. So I know that might have already been covered, or some aspects of it, but that is one of the questions. So who would like to tackle that one?
I think for the parents, when faced with situations, it would be take a breath. I face far more challenging behaviour at work than I do at home, but my ability to maintain a calm approach at home is far shorter than what it is at work, and again, to different levels. So I can find myself losing my temper with my 10-year-old for not brushing his teeth properly. I can be at work with a tutor student throwing a chair across the room and hurling all sort of abuse, and I can stay much calmer in that situation than with my own children who's simply brushing their teeth. So when it's something as difficult as what we're talking about, I think there will be a tendency to almost immediately and shock and awe kind of, oh my God, and react in an over the top way. And I think what Shania or Nicola said about just taking a breath and giving yourself a moment to think through, how am I going to best approach this? Because I can almost guarantee that if you go in heavy handed, you're going to end up creating a barrier between yourself and your child, that it's going to then be very difficult to have those conversations, because they're just going to assume that you're going to fly off the handle again. As a teenager or at any age, you don't want that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. Does anyone want to add anything to that about the piece of Nicola? I see you've unmuted.
Are we staying on parents, or are we going to children?
either, just one piece of advice. So
yeah, I think for children, we have a little saying within our service, is that around self-worth, but my body belongs to me. I can say no and should feel safe doing so. And I think that's one thing to just kind of keep in mind with them, teach them that, it is your body. Respect your body. Others should respect that and your decisions. And obviously you're leading into consent then as well, aren't you? But yeah, that's really important, that they sort of value themselves.
Thank you, Nicola. Did anyone else want to? Shania, did you want to add something?
I think I don't know if I could give advice to like a child, but if I was to give myself that advice all that time ago, if
Your
I was
younger
like,
self,
Shania,
yeah.
should I, like Shania age now, like to 12-year-old Shania looking at me, I'd go, you can tell someone, you can say something, you know, and it's, and yeah, I don't know if I can't say anything else, but like, you can say something, because there's something about secrecy and shame and and that's big on the suicide space of kind of what that kind of makes one feel, kind of empty and nowhere to go, like a dead end everywhere you turn. And there's something about the fruitfulness of a conversation, I don't know, that leaves your mouth and you just feel so weightless, but yeah, you can say something. And for the parents, and and it's the same, I think, you can say something. I think there is a bit of an anxiety of like, oh, my child kind of doesn't really want to speak to me. She's older now and she kind of thinks I'm kind of uncool and like I'm a bit weird because I'm old. And I honestly would love to encourage you, I'm of a certain age with my mum, we love to chat, you know what I mean? And it does get to that point where you kind of go like, actually, my mum's not cool, but she's mine. She's my mum. And who else could I speak to and talk about this with, And we only have one of each, right? And whatever that might be, it might not be biological, might be carer, might be a niece, might be a nephew, might be anyone, but, they're the only ones you're going to have. And if they know, that they can say something to you, doesn't matter what it is, they can say anything. I think that just allows that door open. Nicola said, yeah, it's really hard, it is uncomfortable, I was dead scared, but after that conversation, wow,
like you said, a massive weight's been lifted. I
look back and going, like, oh, I held this in for so long, and it just was the conversation, so now I can't stop talking about it.
Oh no, thank you, Shania. No, that's really helpful. Chris, did you want to add anything before I read the next question?
Yes, I mean, I think for children, our main message is you're worth having healthy relationships and talk if something doesn't feel right. That's that self-esteem stuff that Nicola shared and that Shania is sharing. So I think I'd reiterate that. I think for parents, I guess maybe ask yourself, who do you want to have these conversations with your child? Because it's going to happen. They're going to learn about sex and porn and stuff from somewhere. I guess, who do you want to have that conversation? And there's a power in being the kind of the first mention, the one to help give them a framework to understand stuff, because then actually what they see is then through that lens. And that's where having kind of conversations earlier than you might naturally think, in an age appropriate way, and those little drip-free conversations can really then help give your child a framework for when they do come across stuff and have these other conversations. So I guess that's my question. Yeah, who do you want to have these conversations with your child? And I'd suggest maybe you are very, may not feel it, I don't feel it, but you are a brilliant person to have that safe space with your child.
Thank you so much, Chris. We've got a couple more questions. Vicky, did you want to read that next one out?
We've had some questions about, as somebody who supports refugees' mental health, I think what is being described for those children for who are westernized, this is good to talk to your parents, I do agree, but sadly what's not being mentioned is the refugee community that come from African and Arab countries, and so when they do arrive here, this topic is both daunting and scary, and certainly can't be and would not be spoken to about their parents about this topic. It's pure taboo. The same as mental health, and we see that working in suicide prevention. It's very, very similar. The stigma and shame around both topics. So I think the question is, what can be done for the future community from such countries? I think I've included the same as mental health, and I know supporting several families, this is a common problem. Yeah, so what could be done for future communities?
And actually, Vicky, there was a sort of similar question further up that it was about if a young person is viewing images, but there's a risk at home because of, you know, maybe the faith that they're from and religious aspects should, you know, like a safeguarding view. I'll come on to that, but it's kind of linked as well.
I'm really grateful for that that question, because my background is being also from a West Indian background, so my dad's from there, but also an African background, and that was part of the reason. Also being from a faith background as well, so I have all the three, and being a female, so I've got all, like, any kind of reason not to speak up. I have put them all on the checklist. And I think what actually encouraged my mum and dad into that conversation was the community. It was the community that encouraged them to have that conversation. And it was from being from a faith background, Helen Roberts, who had that, but also in the same breath had a heart that, you know, wanted to kind of speak out, and saw that this was damaging young people and adults as well. I don't think it's just damaging children. So actually what encouraged my family for, you know, to actually have that conversation was the community bringing that conversation about where they couldn't actually avoid it, and that was really imperative. So I think what YMCA and Dignify are doing is going, okay, yeah, the parents, it can start in the home, but we understand that many homes are not set up so that the conversation can be even safe or, you know, regular, or probably be run away from. So, you know, we're very grateful that, you know, a lot of children have other connections, whether it be their, you know, youth group or, you know, school, or, you know, after school club, where we can introduce these conversations, so that if it's not a safe space at home just yet, there's a safe space somewhere. So yeah, that is really important for any kind of, so culture isn't like an inconvenience, it's just a part of their existence, that doesn't kind of mitigate or stop progress in that space.
Thank you. Some feedback when we were talking about the technology earlier, just that one of our delegates said that they agree about technology. There are many parents that don't know about how to work out the access, even down to parents not being fully aware of the dangers of even apps such as Roblox. And education is key for both adults and children. And yeah, I think it was said earlier, wasn't it, that we're living in a world where our children are so clued up about how to do things and how to access things and find ways to access things. So it's about really supporting the parent community. Did anyone want to add anything about that, Nicola? I see you've unmuted. Thank you.
Yeah, there's some really good websites out there for parents. Internet Matters is one of them, and it will take you through the different social media platforms and privacy settings, like how to manage that. So I think, again, it comes back to, if you're going to equip your children with something, you need to know about it as well, and how to manage safety with that. So yeah, do go check that out. You can make sure you've got the best privacy settings going. You can understand about the social media platforms, what the risks are, or how to put parental controls on there. It will help you make an informed decision in terms of what is it that you want your child to access. There's the age verification that's come into play as well. So the Online Safety Act that came into play last year, they have introduced age verification for a reason. So one thing that I do want to get out there is that the ages that are being presented in terms of what the age you need to be to access that platform is there for a reason. Now, obviously, we're talking about we may be looking at it becoming an older age, but, you know, just think about if your child may be really, really asking you, like, please can I have Instagram? Please can I have Snapchat? Please can I have this? Because they want to be part of that friendship community. But there is an age verification. There's a reason for that. And actually, is there other ways that they can be in that friendship group and have those conversations? And actually, what do the friends' parents think as well? You know, I know if children and young people are watching me say this right now, they're like, no, don't bring the parents together to make a decision if we're going to access social media platforms. But it is a conversation that needs to happen. If you're going to have those social media platforms on the smartphones, you must know about them. You must know about the restrictions, how to keep the children safe, know about the reporting, the blocking, because it can get quite nasty. I just want to quickly put in, though, just to kind of speak for the children and young people that we advocate for as well. I did attend an all-party parliamentary group on youth affairs last year as well, when the Online Safety Act was about to come into play. And there were 60-odd young people in that space at Parliament that was saying, don't take away our access to, YouTube, social media, because it has got some really great benefits. What they wanted, what they were saying in that space was, but educate us, teach us what is not safe, what do we do about it, how do we report it, how do we make it safer, how as you as adults make it safer for us. We have a responsibility. So I think what we're seeing, we've come such a long way with the Online Safety Act in this past year, and what we're learning from that, and what we now learn from Australia in terms of, as 16 years of age. Yeah, I think we're moving at pace, and we've got to keep up with our technological education.
Thanks so much, Nicola.
I have one question that came in advance of today's talk, and that was, and I really like it because it's quite a hopeful question. And Shania, maybe you might like to answer this as well. Obviously, as a parent, the devastation, the panic, the shock of that moment where it could be that a one-off sighting of something shocking and horrific, or perhaps discovering that your child, whether that child's an adult, has been addicted to pornography for so many years, and the shame has had such a huge impact on their mental health. It's been absolutely devastating. And of course, even having to the point of having suicidal thoughts. Can I just ask you this question that came in? What's the impact of that early exposure to pornography on young people's mental health and relationships? And is there a way of overcoming it? The question was, is it reversible? Is that a long-term impact? I wonder whether you could.
That's a brilliant question. Brilliant question. It is. Everything's reversible. And, as human beings, a lot of these things, when we're young, yes, it is built into our psyche because, we're growing, but also kind of like how you train the mind to learn how to do something really well, you can also train it to learn how to do something else really well. And I think that is also an option. I don't believe everyone's forever, damaged at all, and that's just never been my experience, and it never will be my experience, and I don't believe that's for any child, and I don't believe that's for any adult, and I think in this conversation it's really important that we kind of take off this idea that because this happened, this is who I am. Not at all. This is a beautiful thing. Sex is a beautiful thing, and unfortunately, just due to the world we live in, some things that are beautiful don't actually get to be beautiful because of the things we do to it. But we can also do something amazing with it by telling people the truth about it if they have an understanding of it that is not very true. And I think that what helps us to kind of make things much better is that where there's darkness, we bring light, and there is, confusion, we bring clarification. Where there is, unsurety, we bring something to someone to be assured in. And I think where Dignify and, YMCA come in is trying to not necessarily make people kind of scared, but actually to kind of go, yeah, this sometimes is scary, but actually it's not if we see it like this. It's not scary if we understand it like this. And, I actually have so much hope with my story and many other young people's stories that actually, we can come in and say, yeah, this did happen. Yes, I did struggle here, but look, like what we're doing from that place. So yeah, my hope is that, the scar doesn't make things actually look ugly. Is actually what wasn't able to destroy, actually. So my encouragement is, when your child does come to you and say, this has happened and this is what I've been struggling for so many years, you can come in and go, do you know what, it's horrible, but guess what, we're going to work at this, we're going to change this, we're going to, you know, and we're going to get educated and we're going to kind of grow from this space, you know. And I found that, you know, beautiful things sometimes start off a bit broken and unsure, and, you know, when you kind of rejig it. So my hope is always for any young person, and I find that the most inspirational of stories have come from really, you know, dark and dingy places. And I don't think we should despise small beginnings, so to speak, or uncomfortable beginnings, but actually be encouraged by them, that from where they've come from, they can get to a better place. So I'm encouraged by the idea that, yes, you know, it did start off a bit strange, and yeah, someone might be struggling, but it doesn't mean that struggling is where they're going to stay. There's resources, there's education, there is, you know, people that have gone through it, you know, and addiction in any space, where life has gotten better. And I think young people need to see that, in a sense, where, you know, where people have gotten better, so that they can see the hope and be educated that actually these horrible things I'm thinking and feeling, I don't have to think and feel this way. Like, that is just, it's, you know, when I was young, it was, oh my gosh, is this going to be my everyday? You know, is this going to be what my mind is filled with? And because I've had that conversation and I've had people to speak this through and talk to it, and didn't, you know, shower me with shame, they showered me with love, I can go to a young person and go, do you know what, no, like, there's going to be a time where you will be able to share with another person, no, this is not going to be your experience forever. Actually, you know, there is steps up, there is a way forward. So yeah, it's to bring, you know, light in a dark space, is to actually bring hope. So I hope that people would see that, you know, the education that we're bringing is to actually make, you know, people who might feel like there is no hope and there's, you know, my child has experienced this, what am I going to do? And it's more of a situation of, no, actually, where are we going to start from? Because we have to start and we're going to go and we're going to move forward. So yeah, I'm extremely encouraged by the idea that, you know, you don't stay where you started.
Wow, what an amazing place to end, Shania. That's just amazing. Thank you, Shania. I honestly feel that this conversation is not going to end, Shania. We're going to revisit this. We already have done back in the autumn. We did another panel event talking about pornography. You can find it on our YouTube channel, actually, if you want to watch that in addition to tonight. It's called Exploring the Impact and Suicide Risk of Children Accessing Pornography. A very different conversation from this evening, but you can see how concerned we are and how much we want to break through the stigma of conversations, and to be able to get to the point where Shania is, that Shania, surrounded by love, conversation and community, has got to this point where, you know, she can feel it's a scar that is part of her, you know, and to be something to know she's overcome with love around her. I don't want to be the last person having the final word. I'd love just to hand over to everybody to say their goodbye.
I think it's just, as a parent and as a professional, it's just so much food for thought, isn't it? And, you know, my head is awash with ideas, and Shania is kind of a spark that makes that happen. And as you say, I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship.
Ross, can we come to you? Is there any final comment you'd like to make?
No, it's been just a joy to be here, to listen to the conversation. The fact there's so many like-minded people that are wanting to help and support young people and any issues they might be having, whether it's this or any other. Because I think essentially, as much as this is a difficult conversation, there are many difficult conversations that we have to have with young people. So if you can start by broaching one problem that sets you up to then broach and support them with other issues that they might be facing as well. And I think the more we do this, the more we can normalise that conversation. I think there's been an awful lot of good work done with sort of men's mental health, whereas celebrities are coming out and being brave enough to put themselves forward to say that this is a conversation that needs to happen, that hopefully at some stage this gets the sort of platform that it needs as well, so that all of this is normal to some point, because everybody suffers with various different things through their life. So yeah, just hopefully that we can keep the conversation going.
Thanks, Ross. Chris, Nicola?
Yeah, I would happily jump in. I think we've said it a lot, you know, one of the key words is education and communities. And I think if we all come together as communities, so that being all the different providers in those communities, and in particular, you know, with schools, education settings, we can hear children, give them their voice that they need, because it can be really hard for children as well to share these, you know, difficult conversations as parents, as you know, we're thinking about talking to them. They are going to struggle as well talking to you. So I think if we can open up conversations safely in education settings, youth groups, and in the homes, we do it all together, we're stronger together, we're better together.
Thanks, Nicola. And Chris?
So good. Yeah, no, just to pick up from, I guess, what Shania said with that, starting from where we're at, you know, we're all got different experiences personally and as parents, and our children, where our children at with this issue. But it's like, you know, where we're at, let's not feel shame. Let's come out of any shame we're feeling around it and help our children too. And just start small with those little conversations, and us sharing and our children sharing, and it's amazing what can grow out of that.
Thank you all so much. We really hope that this discussion has just provided a little bit more clarity for everybody, put a bit of context around it, hopefully a bit more reassurance and hope to how we start these conversations. Certainly as a parent, it's just that drip, that's what I'm taking away, you know, those, rather than a 1 hour conversation, just 100 minute, 101 minute conversations. And I think that goes with everything, doesn't it? Even with all of the topics that we talk about at Ollie, it's all about just dripping in those conversations, creating that trust. So I just want to say a huge thanks to our wonderful guests that joined us on this talk this evening, many of whom have missed their own bedtimes with their children, saying goodnight to them and given up their evenings for us. And we're really grateful for that. So thank you. And all of you, Shania, Ross, Chris, Nicola, we're honoured to have you with us this evening. Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.